Hold it, chuck it.
I 2015 blev det registrerat 289 överdosdödsfall i Norge.
Whatever happens, we're totally prepared.
This must be related to the fact that you have this terrible mental disorder called homosexuality.
Stop it, you're making me sick.
The Australia book. It's about the history of our country.
Government not to kill us, to take our lands.
I'm so small, I'm just a person, and the system is very big.
Jeg tenker ikke på hva jeg sier lenger.
We have not come here to beg world leaders to care.
Because I fight the government. I'm not afraid of the government.
But change is coming, whether you like it or not.
Remember to love one another before hatred prevails.
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight on this panel discussion, The New Sudan, a Revolution for All. My name is Resha Younis. I'm an LGBT rights researcher focusing on the Middle East and North Africa region at Human Rights Watch, an international human rights organization that operates in more than 90 countries around the world. Today we have the protagonist of the film Arts of Sin, Ahmed Omar. We also have with us esteemed activists who work on Sudan on the issues of sexual and gender minorities. And we have with us Tor Olsen, who is the executive director of Sex of Politikk. I will start the conversation. We'll be moderating throughout. We will have an opportunity for a Q&A afterwards. I will start by introducing Ahmed Omar. Ahmed, thank you so much for being with us today. Ahmed is a cross-disciplinary artist who came to Norway from Sudan in 2008 as a political refugee. Among other narratives, his work explores the complex relationship between identity, authority, sexuality, depression, and art. He is the protagonist of the film. Ahmed, I'm going to start by asking you, we watched the film. It's a very nuanced narrative of identity, and it's a whirlwind of emotions. What was your motivation for being in the film, and what messages did you hope to bring across?
Hello, Roshan. Thanks for having me. First, I will start with my story of coming out in 2015 and finding out that there is a lot of ignorance when it comes to the LGBT plus situation. There is, I got questions that are so basic in as like what is it to be gay, and I felt that there is something to do. There is a responsibility to spread informations and to cut the third party that tells our story for us, and I thought it's better, instead of having someone telling my story, then I will take the charge of my own story and tell it by myself. So the information would come directly from me. And also, I wanted to start this sense of relatability, just from my own experience as a teenager and having no body to relate to, but some Westerner or Western figures that are queer. So I decided that that's my duty as well, to be someone for a teenager in Sudan to be related to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I definitely think that the film does resonate with a lot of LGBT plus people around the region, and it really left a mark in me as well. It's a very authentic documentation.
Thank you.
Another question to you as well. We see you in the film witnessing the Sudanese revolution, and we see you chanting along. What, in your view, did the revolution attempt to achieve, and how has it succeeded?
The revolution was a dream for especially our generation, the generation that have had the possibility to see the world through internet, and to have also the possibility to say no. We had this dream of living in a democracy that is where everyone is included, where everyone has the same right as everyone. and that was my motivation to be part of it. And I mean, if we look at Sudan, it has the every potential to be a country that is between the top countries in the world, but it's still there is a lot of problems when it comes to personal freedom and using this potential. And also, democracy is not free. It comes with a cost. It comes with the cost that of accepting other people's existence. So I thought that if we are coming all together in a democracy, then I want to grant my space as well, and people of Sudan as well should also know that we exist, and we demand our rights, and we have the same right to be as everyone else. And when it comes to what did it achieve, until now there is some spaces for freedom, but it is I think it's a little bit risky because with the space that we got, there is also the space of fanatic religious people that came out and publicly spoke against homosexuality, and that led to an incident that is actually today. It's a year since it's happened. The incident of Abu Hamad that happened after a religious person came out in the markets and started motivating people against a group of LGBT or gay people who worked in Abu Hamad. And that led to the people attacking this group of guys and murdered two of them by stepping on them and stoning them. And it did not only stop on that, but it have actually went further in blocking the graveyard, so the first one who died would not be buried within the Muslims. So there is still a lot to do. There is definitely a collective work that have to be done there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your response and for reminding us of the horrific incident that happened today last year. I will now turn to Noor and Hamada, who work on LGBT issues in Sudan and the region. Hamada is the executive director of Shades of Ebony, a Sudan-based LGBT plus rights organization, also a part of the Sudanese SOGI coalition. He is an LGBTQIA plus advocate committed to intersectional activism around sexual and gender diversity. Noor is the executive director of Bidaya, an LGBTI rights organization working in Egypt and Sudan. She is also the coordinator of the Alliance of Queer Egyptian Organizations. Noor's 10 years experience in advocating for SOGI rights awarded her the Human Rights Prize of the French Republic. Noor and Hamada, I'm going to ask you both about the film. First of all, I know you both also took part in the film and played a significant role with the filmmaker and Ahmed. What is the significance of this film for you? How do you think it can contribute, or it has contributed, to positive change in Sudan?
Thank you, Rasha. We are very excited, and I'm personally very excited to be part of this discussion, as I believe it's quite important. And as you mentioned, reflecting at the film and what was the motivation of participating and being part of this film, and also what is the expectation coming out of it. I think it's very important that, as Ahmed mentioned, to have a role model, to know that you're not completely alone, especially in a place that doesn't have enough access, doesn't have enough exposure to ensure that you have, knowing all the available resources, talking about LGBTQI plus individuals, to ensure that you do understand that you're not alone, and what you are, it's not a sin and it's not a mistake. So this film comes in perfectly to fill this gap, giving a voice, giving a face, giving a name for queer people in Sudan who they can relate to. They know that they are coming from the same background. The fact that Ahmed was able to show his face and to ensure that it's not only those organizations or individuals who are supported or funded by the West in general, trying to change the perception of our society and culture. No, actually, there is actual queer people who are Sudanese, who are part of the community. And they deserve to be heard. They deserve to be able to discuss their issues. They deserve to be part of a state or a country that treats them as citizens, because they are. So I think this is where the significance of this film comes, because it sends this message, it demands for those rights, and it shows that there is actually Sudanese who are part of this community.
Thank you so much, Hamada. Noor, over to you.
Thank you, Rasha. I think the film touched me on a personal level. The story of the film is similar to most of the stories that we hear from LGBT persons in Sudan. Sudan is having this tribal community, the connection with the family and the extended family has a great impact when we are raised up. So losing this connection because of our identity is very hard and affect us emotionally and psychologically. So seeing such a story of Ahmed in the film contributed to support to those who have the same experience as Ahmed. The film also, I think, could be a great advocacy tool on the regional and international level to give voice for LGBT movement in Sudan. And I think it's also could play an important role to gain allies from the civil society in Sudan, because it shows that the human side of the story of the LGBT people in Sudan. So it has different way to tell the story. The last thing, I think it's a good, it could have a good and positive impact on mothers who have the same experience with their children as Ahmed had with his mother. So I think it's a very great movie. So thank you, Ahmed, and thank you all the people who have been part of this movie.
Thank you both so much. Noor, you mentioned a really important point that we usually rarely talk about on the effects of this work on individuals' mental health and psychological health more generally. Also, the centrality of the family in our region and how this film can also contribute to breaking some of those misconceptions and stereotypes around our identities. Hamada, I'm going to turn to you and ask more about the work that you're doing right now in Sudan. In what ways has the human rights situation changed as a consequence of the revolution in Sudan? So if you can discuss with me kind of the important milestones and challenges specifically on the spaces that have opened up for sexual and gender minorities and individuals working on the rights of sexual and gender minorities in Sudan.
Thank you, Rasha. I think this is a very important question, because just understanding the basic concept that Sudan had been ruled by a regime for over 3 decades that don't want to even discuss the concept of rights, can never, like, for example, talking about like sexual and reproductive health and rights, it had never looked at it from this concept. It was completely forbidden to publicly announce that you're focusing on something related to bodily rights, sexual rights, reproductive rights even. It was like you can discuss this from a concept of reproductive health, but that's it. Knowing that this regime, the idea of it, like this very basically a police state that always watching you carefully, making sure that no one is discussing any of those topics whatsoever. To know that this completely disappeared, or not completely, of course, but at least the threat of it, it's no longer as intense as it used to be. But you know that there is in place right now a civilian government that most of them already are human rights activists, and they do advocate. And the slogan of the transitional period is to make the global human rights as the base of the Sudanese state. This already makes a great impact. It makes this psychological effect that at least now we can feel safe to address those topics. I can call it the illusion of out of a sudden having more safe spaces where you can operate. The fact that there is no one is monitoring every word that's coming out of your mouth. So you can slowly start figuring out who are your allies, how you can communicate with them. This is a great difference. This is something that we have to be quite aware of, looking at the current situation of the human rights movement in Sudan in general, and specifically the LGBTI+ rights movement. And looking at all those factors, of course, that impact like what is our expectations and what do we aspire to achieve in this period? Like discussing the situation of the LGBTI+ community within the movement back like before 2018 is completely from how we are discussing it at this point. We are willing to address issues like repealing the law. Before we were just discussing to stop the death penalty, looking at the possibility of even trying to communicate with the government to work on policy advocacy level where more inclusive policies, more anti-discriminatory policies are being in place. This was not something that we would consider 3 years ago, but it's something that we are actually willing to pursue at this point and willing to plan for it. So just to sum it all, I think the revolution had made a great impact, but also we had bigger expectations. And I wouldn't say that it completely met those expectations.
Thank you so much, Hamada. You also touched on a very important point on self-censorship. I think, the need for activists and individuals in the region to censor themselves, to begin to give themselves permission to enter the public sphere, and how much that hinders the very important work that activists and organizations are doing in the region. So, as you said, kind of having to trespass that and transcend from the private sphere to the public sphere makes a huge difference in how we can organize also politically on the ground. You also touched on legislation, and we know that the death penalty was abolished across the board in 2020 in Sudan, also for same-sex acts, but prison terms increased from minimum 5 years to 7 years. Could you comment on this, specifically on the role of organizations like yours in advocating for these changes behind the scenes and how these amendments were received?
Absolutely. And I think this is why exactly I was saying that we had bigger expectations from this government, from this transitional period. I think it was that we are trying to look into what kind of layers or what kind of levels we can operate on, because there is a very important demographic, which is the Sudanese public, who you need to communicate with. This is your opportunity to communicate with. This is your opportunity to be more brave, because you're not as censored as you used to be. And you have to address this public to understand that we have participated in this revolution. Me and many other queer people in Sudan have participated in this revolution. Many Sudanese diaspora like Ahmed around the world have participated in the uprisings and in the revolution. And as everyone went out to demand their rights, to ensure that their voices are being heard, to ensure that they have access to services, we also have that right. So this is a level of communication that we need to have with the general public, but at the same time, because this is a very unique opportunity, and we can never make sure that we're going to have this opportunity anytime soon again, then we also have to operate on the level of policy advocacy, on the decision-making level. Whether to start expanding our partnerships and our networking and our communication with the civil society, because we also know that the civil society is playing a very important role in this transitional period, where they are also monitoring the change of policies. They are proposing law articles and they are proposing policy samples to the government to see that how they can be inclusive and sensitive enough. So we need to start working on that level and communicate with our partners, with our allies within the civil society. We also need to start address the government directly, whether on the level of the Prime Minister or the level of the Minister of Justice or so on. We need to communicate directly. We need to address those kind of issues. And it was quite disappointing to see that they had an opportunity to take a step forward toward personal freedoms and personal rights, but then they took 2 steps back by increasing the sentence. That was, I don't know who they were trying to please. This revolution went against those fundamentalists, against those like extremist Islamists. Why are we still trying to please them? The aim was to get rid of them, what's happening. So that was quite disappointing. And I think we do still have a very long way to push and address those kind of issues and to try to communicate with the government because they are obligated.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hamada. Noor, I'm also curious, hearing from your work on Egypt and Sudan and also hearing from Hamada, it's really impressive how there's an intersectional movement and how civil society is also involved in this movement. And this is sparked by revolutions, of course. So on the streets, when people are demanding human rights for all, of course, this includes queer and trans people as well. So I'm wondering if you, from your end, from Egypt, how you received the amendments as well, and how you think this situates, the human rights situation around sexual and gender minorities in the region, specifically in contexts like Egypt and Tunisia, which have had their own revolutions. But we also have seen backtracking of human rights more generally and LGBT plus rights more specifically.
Thank you, Rasha. I think the law reform in general and the transitional government in Sudan attitude toward human rights approach and start with the reforming specific laws. It was a positive. It had a positive impact on us and give us like an indication that the government want to work toward a better Sudan. But on another hand, that's the law reform wasn't complete. There's something missing. There is still the law has still a tone of discrimination, and this is have been something that's give us also more directions to work and push more for more change and more for another law reform. And I think that Sudan revolution came after 8 years of the Arab Spring and that happened in 2011, and this at this time most of human rights activists, especially in Egypt and in Tunisia and other countries like Algeria, they start losing hope in change. So Sudan revolution and uprising brought some hope that change might be happening and it's possible. Even though Sudan have been in 30 years under dictatorship regime, so this gave the activists around the region some hope that change could happen. I mean, in a country like Egypt, the government has been cracking down on civil society and LGBT community and activists on different level. And I think we witnessed recently also in Tunisia the same attitude. And how those government also using all these techniques and tools and tracking people and surveillance was very clear during the pandemic, because we have been experiencing in 2020 the challenge of living under all these health situation of COVID-19, and also the authoritarian regimes start using a lot of tools to prosecute people and to give more like themselves the right to do this violation because of the pandemic. So I think the situation in general of human rights and LGBT, in specific in the region, it's not in the best situation. But what happened recently in Sudan, and also the reform, as I mentioned before, it's gave a little bit like a small light at the end of the dark tunnel. Yeah.
Thank you so much. But I also remember, there was a revolution in Lebanon at the same time that there was in Sudan, and participating in the revolution and cheering for Sudan and chanting in unison was really inspiring and empowering. But also, as you said, the situation right now across the region is pretty bleak. And, as Human Rights Watch, we've also documented what's happening in Tunisia more recently, police cracking down on protesters and scapegoating LGBT plus activism to discredit broader movements. Also, as you said, within the pandemic in Egypt, you've documented with your organization as well, torture, entrapment on social media and other apps. So these issues definitely need our attention and continue to worsen despite the resistance and resilience of activists around the region. I'm now going to turn to Tor to ask you a little bit about your work and also comment on the situation right now from your end in Norway. So Tor Olsen is the executive director of Sex og Politikk, the Norwegian member organization of the International Planned Parenthood Organization, where he is responsible for the global SOGI work. His background spans over human rights work nationally and internationally, particularly in Southern and Eastern Africa. Tor, my question to you is, how do you situate the film Art of Sin in the fight to develop and strengthen sexual and reproductive rights as pertaining to your work in Norway specifically?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this very exciting panel. I think that it's obvious that Norway playing such an important role in the revolution in Sudan as one of the three countries that are leading internationally in the so-called Troika, together with the UK and the US, we have a particular role here. So when Ahmed and film producer Ibrahim came to us with the idea of such a film, we thought that was great. So we immediately agreed to ensure that this film was made. And the usage of the film is obvious. I think in addition to what is said here, it is also placing LGBT rights into a human rights context. Because in many places where you see revolutions like the one that we witnessed in Sudan, it is not obvious for all the human rights organizations or all the health organizations, as we are a health and human rights organization, that this is part of human rights. This is part of health, and particularly important is to have somebody that comes from the region. So we've had a marvelous cooperation with them in the production of this film. And the film company that we use, Skagerak Film, and I think that this film very well shows the reason why sexual rights must be part of human rights in any revolution, because we find queer people everywhere.
Absolutely, thank you. And also, as you said, in revolutions across the region, we've seen how LGBT plus rights have been part and parcel, and how this idea that society is not ready to accept LGBT plus people is false, because people do join together for the same demands and they're really indispensable and indivisible. I'm going to turn to you, Ahmed, again, and ask you, since we're talking about the role of different states, what do you think the role of the Sudanese diaspora is in first uplifting voices, but also contributing from your, specific position to the movements that are happening locally?
I think it's very. It goes hand in hand, the revolution on place and also in the diaspora, and I think the role that we, all of us Sudanese around the world, have played is not to be ignored, and motivating, and also trying to push the states we live in to be involved and to be to promote for equality. So I think it's really an important role. You have mentioned a point that is quite interesting, that and I got quite a lot of comments through social media, that we are not ready for the kind of rights that you're demanding. Sudan is not ready for that. Sudan is more concerned about like food and fuel and rights for everyone, and then after we grant this, we can think about your kind. And the answer is like we are also part of that, and we are not like we're not going to have the crisis on fuel and health and everything, and also your discrimination against us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, the question that we keep asking, and the women's rights movement also faced this a decade ago and still faces it now, is, if not now, when do we fight for these rights? If not within a revolution, when are we going to get the chance to fight for the same rights that everyone else is fighting for? I'm also going to turn back to Hamada and Noor. We've been talking about the positive things. We've been talking about how the Sudanese revolution changed the situation on the ground. But we don't want to paint a picture too rosy. I mean, there are still challenges on the ground. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, even on a personal basis, but also on an organizing basis, what do you think are some of the challenges that you're still facing? How do you feel like you can be supported better, both locally, regionally, and internationally?
Yeah, I think it is very important that we need to remember the fact that this government, and for it, like the previous government I'm talking about, that for it to stay for 3 decades, the influence of the behavior of the government, the influence of the agenda of the government will be very apparent on the general public. And when we are talking about governmental institutions, when we are talking about like service provision centers, when we are talking about the health sector, when we are talking about the education sector, all of those entities, they are controlled and managed by individuals who are influenced by this government. So, and to feel that kind of internal threat, in like from their perspective, that they are losing their morals, they are losing their very good relation with God and with their religion, because there is an expansion of rights, that of course is going to generate a lot of social backlash. That's going to generate a lot of social violence to overcompensate the role that the previous government has lost. So there is this issue. It's very apparent. It's very clear. I think there is still a very long process, a very long journey to work on how the general public are perceiving what an LGBTQI plus community look like and how do they behave. I think it's still a very long conversation about understanding that all the layers, as Ahmed was talking, all the layers of discrimination that faced by the general public, you add to it the layer of discrimination of being queer and then give it to the LGBTQI plus community. So we are not, when people say like, because this is still something that is being said even by part of the civil society, even by some of individuals who are claiming to be human rights activists, that this is not the right time. This country is still quite fragile. We cannot discuss this now. But why don't people just stop and think, what are the demands of the LGBTQI plus community? I want to demand my right of life, basically, because, and this is something that was discussed in the film, that it's just the fact that my existence as a human being is criminalized by the law of the country that should provide me my citizens' right. My basic identity is a crime. So I'm not discussing here, because somehow people tend to run to the idea that LGBTQI plus rights means pride and same-sex marriage, but we are talking about the right for living, the right to access services as everyone else, the right to be able to be educated, the right to be protected protected by the government, by my government. So this is still a very long journey. And I think people always need to understand that not today and not within the upcoming couple of years, things going to change. It's going to take a very long time, maybe shorter than we expect, but it is a very complicated process. And we need to understand that if we didn't start now, we will never get there.
Thank you so much. Noor, do you want to comment on this as well?
Thank you, Rasha, and thank you, Hamada. I think most of the challenges that we are facing on the ground in Sudan, it's around lacking of social acceptance, and that's led to lack of friendly spaces and lack of safe spaces for LGBT people to meet, to talk, to discuss, to just be there. And I think also one of the most challenges in the current situation in Sudan is the economical challenges. Sudan is still under the economical sanction, although there is some of the promises that the sanction will be left by the previous US government, but until this moment, Sudan is really facing a very difficult economic situation, and this is affecting all part of life, and including LGBT people. And I think these things is increasing their marginalization. On another hand, the laws, as Hamada mentioned, is a main challenge. Laws either directly, like Article 148, that criminalize homosexuality in Sudan, or indirect by using other laws that target LGBT people through public immorality or social norms. So I think these in general, the challenges that we face through our work, but also the civil society who are the allies that we could work with or build a network and pushing and asking for better situation for Sudanese citizens still need more work. So many of the civil society organization and human rights activists in Sudan, they don't put LGBT right as part of human rights agenda, and this is really a huge a challenge for us to push for more rights for LGBT people in Sudan. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for touching on the economic aspect as well. You know, this is what we talk about when we talk about intersectionality, the position of each individual, the position of each society, and the basic struggles that people are struggling with and how that is exacerbated by discrimination. You also mentioned something about social acceptance, and Hamada, you commented on religion. There's this concept that governments really try to communicate across the region that religion, whatever religion it may be, and LGBTQIA plus rights do not mix. And this is absolutely something that is not correct. You know, I remember in 2018, Human Rights Watch did basically a documentary, a short video on, you know, LGBT people's and activist experiences around the region. And they spoke about, you know, their own identities, and they spoke about their own faith. They also spoke about all of the misconceptions that they face on a daily basis. And it was also that kind of depiction, you know, aside from the suffering and the pain and, you know, this idea that individuals across the region are not empowered, LGBT people are not necessarily empowered. They demonstrated how they are still empowered. They're still, you know, fighting for their rights. And we need to really detach this picture of all these myths and misconceptions from how individuals actually live out their lives. This also reminds me, Ahmed, in the film, we see that you also faced discrimination and violence in Norway. And there's this idea also around the world, really, that, you know, the West is done with these issues. The West has overcome homophobia and transphobia, and now we're focusing on regions like the MENA region. What do you say about that? And what was the significance in the film of including this instance of discrimination and violence against you in a country like Norway?
Yeah, first I want to mention that it was the first time that I physically was attacked in the street just for being who I am. So the idea that Norway specifically, because it's promoted that a country of human rights, of the peace and the Nobel Peace Prize and all these kind of nice things, which there is a lot of, but it's far away from being a perfect safe haven for LGBT plus people. So yeah, there is still a lot of work to do, and the discrimination yes, I can admit that it's much less, but it goes in different ways. It's indirect. It's especially if you're an LGBT plus person from a background of immigrant, then there is a lot of seriously a lot of issues that have to be addressed. I wanted to add to Hamada and Noor's statements that there is a project that it's a very optimistic project about the change that might happen or that should happen in Sudan. Yeah, the change after 30 years, it's very difficult to open people's eyes to us and to introduce ourselves. But hopefully in 2030 we will be having the Nile Pride in the Nile Street in the middle of Khartoum. So hand in hand all together, individuals, organizations, even states, we should work together to make this dream come true.
Excellent. I hope to be in that Pride parade in 2030. Sora, I'm going to turn to you. You know, we've heard from the activists on the ground what the challenges remain, and we've also heard how the situation in Norway is also always could be bettered. So I'm wondering from your end, what do you think Norway and more broadly the international community can do better to support activists who are working on these very important issues around the region and in Sudan specifically?
Thank you. I think that Norway in particular has a special role, since it is one of these chosen 3 countries from the international community that is negotiating directly with the different actors in Sudan. And as much as there, of course, also are challenges here, as there are everywhere, I think that Norway is one of those countries where the population at large expects LGBT rights to be part of human rights, and there is not really any political opposition to that in Norway, and therefore one would expect that that is also what Norway can bring to the table where they work in other countries, which is not always the case, and therefore it is very good that when we are talking to the government, we can use an example of local actors telling their story so as clearly as what we've seen here today, and like Ahmed does through the film. So I think that is the main thing. As the international community, I think it's always the issue to ensure that everybody can see clearly that LGBTI rights are not special rights or different rights. They are human rights like any other rights. And I think that's the main thing that we're doing. We're working with our sister organizations in different countries. IPPF, we are in a little bit more than 140 countries around the world, where we have offices, and integrating LGBTI rights into the rights picture is not that easy in every country. So we have a special program where we've started from Norway, where we're taking 12 of them to start off with, and we can see that it is something that is easily explainable. And I think it's important that sort of more mainstream human rights organizations like ours that focus on sexual and reproductive health and rights in general, that we make sure that we include LGBT rights. And I think that's the contribution that every human rights organizations or equal rights organizations or health organizations, because that's what it's about. It's not about LGBT rights, it's about health, human rights, equal rights. And I would like, since I can see we're going towards the end, maybe to ask our activists from the ground, what would you like to see from the international community? Because you've said a lot about what the situation is and how you're working yourselves. But what is the role that we can play, and particularly in Norway? I mean, most of the audience for this talk is a Norwegian audience, since this is a Norwegian film festival. So you have a chance to talk to an audience which is from one of these 3 international actors that are most important in the Sudanese picture at the moment.
I think if I can comment on Tor's question, we do believe that the concept of universal rights, the concept of building those kind of bridges between cultures and embracing diversity, it's something that easily discussed on many levels. And I think also that within the bilateral communication and conversation between supporting and ally countries for believing and supporting on the LGBTQI plus rights, and between the Sudanese government, it should be one of the priorities of discussions with the Sudanese government on tackling the sexual and reproductive health and rights, and also on tackling specifically the rights of the LGBTQI plus communities, to address the fact that criminalizing identities does affect the productivity and the diversity within the country, which is an asset to this country. I think many international or many countries from the international community do have leverage on the current government, because the current government is looking into technical support, is looking into financial support. It's also looking into the importance of communicating with the world, because the previous government was completely isolated. So the current government is actually trying so hard to catch up with the development that have been happening on the last 30 years. And I still believe completely that international entities, the international community, friendly governments can and must have this discussion with the Sudanese government. This is what we are expecting. We're also expecting to support the local activists, those who are on the ground, to give them platforms and spaces such as this platform to address their issues, to have conversations and to be heard. And it's very important to remind all those, whether INGOs or UN agencies or countries that want to support, that it's very important to listen to the need of the local activists, because they are the ones who are working on the ground. They are the ones who can list their priorities based on the situation. So I think, yeah, there is many expectations from countries such as Norway or the international community in general.
I would like also to add to what Hamada said, because Sudan now is the golden opportunity. It's a transitional government that's want to do a lot of changes, want to comply with human rights standard, and also the Universal Periodic Review is coming for Sudan in this October. So I think we expect the friendly governments to give some recommendations to Sudan to improve human rights situation, including LGBT situation, and to direct some recommendation regarding decriminalization of sodomy law, and also adopting more anti-discrimination laws. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Noor and Hamada. Yes, these international instruments are very important, such as the UPR as well. And I also need to add to that, as an actor in an international organization as well. I agree with you, Hamada, that speaking on behalf of activists is never the way to go. Documentation is very important. Accountability and using our reach and our platforms to amplify voices is very important, but it's also very important to include activists on the ground and never to speak on their behalf. If anyone in the audience, we're now opening it up to questions. If anyone in the audience has any questions, please do send them, and we can direct them to the activist or the panelists whom you want to ask the question to.
If I may add one thing, Noor, to the things, the work with the UPR process is important, and it's a process that Norway gives big attention to. So definitely, I think that is something that we can work on. I'd also like to add one other aspect of the work that we can do internationally, and that is the work with our own diasporas. That we are using this film to show in schools, and we've sent Ibrahim and Ahmed into schools, especially in areas where we have big Arabic-speaking populations in Norway, or also we've used it in schools where what we call introduction classes for new inhabitants in Norway, because that is also a challenge that some of the influence in some of the countries comes from the diaspora, and not always in a positive way. We can see that. I mean, even when you look at Syria, how many of the warriors for the IS were actually from Europe, and so that there is a work to do there as well, which is an important aspect for the international community.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. If anyone else from the panelists would like to add anything, Ahmed, I mean, this can go on forever. I'm very interested in, you know, the mediums that you use, the mediums of art and cinema and film and sculpture and so many other mediums that you use are so important in communicating to a large audience, but also a concerned audience, these issues in a different way. How do you see your work moving forward as contributing to these movements around the region and Sudan specifically?
I think one of the things that I was very much concerned about that I want to work as hard as possible and also be as successful as I can. So to also have this to try to eliminate this picture or this image that being gay is not a minus thing, is not a thing that is that can hinder your success or your creativity or being someone important in where you are. So yeah, so I use like my medium is through tactility. It's not. I'm not that kind of people who is comfortable in speaking publicly or being an active part in organizations and so. But I believe my voice is through art, through materials, and through the things that can be bodily felt. Yeah, I will do as much as I can in order for my experience to be as a teenager and feeling alone and feeling that I'm a cursed human being and I'm not worthy of life and I should not be living. I would like this experience to be unique, meaning that it would not be repeated anymore. And yeah, that's the point behind everything I do, and nonetheless is the film.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Anyone else from the panelists want to say something before we close? All right, thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you for the incredible panelists. It was a really inspiring and, for me, very rewarding conversation. If you guys want to continue listening to other panels and also participating in the film festival, this is the Human International Documentary Film Festival in Oslo, and it's the largest documentary film festival in the city. The 2021 festival is the 13th edition of it. To keep up with the festival, you can follow them on Instagram at HumanIDFF, or on Facebook as Human International Documentary Film Festival, or on their webpage. The film Art of Sin will be available on this platform until 14th of March if you are in Norway. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you for the panelists again, and I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.